When Coupe arrived in New Zealand, he never could have imagined the advances we would make in just over a millennium. Certainly, he could have never predicted that one day his ancestors would be living it up in pleasure palaces like this one in Ōrākei.
All the 333, all the 555, honeybee number 379, 79, 2727, 85.
Today, the modern New Zealander enjoys an activity unknown to our ancestors. The combination of time, money and inclination that we call leisure.
46, 46, 1772. That'll do.
Being a hard-working people, pre-European Maori had no concept of leisure. Indeed, te reo has no word for it. The closest translation comes from the word takako takohe, or the time between times. Recent studies have produced a startling portrait of how pre-European Maori utilised their spare time. Anthropologists believe Maori divided most of their takako takohe between storytelling, kapa haka, stick games, and generally mucking about. With no interest in stick games, the first Europeans saw little merit in Maori leisure, but Maori and Pākehā did have two pastimes in common: sex and rugby. Sex was the main form of leisure among early Pākehā. It helped pass the time on the ships that brought the settlers to New Zealand and informed a great deal of immigrant literature.
They had sailed not more than a mile from shore when Lord Sainsbury began his tricks upon Catherine. She feared she would be forced to endure his pious ejaculations when, like a hotspur young cock, he bound her up in rope and sheets and put his stubborn digit about her fundament.
However, once landed, immigrant men were in for a nasty surprise. Due to a lack of selenium in the New Zealand soil, the early male settlers soon found they had a problem. They simply couldn't get hard. In a land green with promise, this was nature's cruelest trick. Timber was plentiful, but when it came to getting wood, the early settlers were helpless.
Erectile dysfunction was one of the biggest problems facing the colony. However, it did create a lucrative cottage industry and impotence remedies.
Dr. Gabriel's horn is irrefutably the finest product to offer the discerning gentleman the means to practice acts of impalement de mort on a regular basis.
Thankfully, Maori had no such problem, and interracial couplings saved us from being a nation of soft cocks. Rugby would also play a key role in making New Zealanders hard.
It's a real man sport.
Well, mainly because it's a manly game. It requires a lot of physical contact.
Although devised by English schoolboys, the New Zealand game had its roots in an early Maori game known as tū kai iwi, in which groups of warriors contested possession of a shrunken head. The subject of trophy heads was dealt with in this recently discovered animated film strip. Nowadays, we prefer vinyl balls to shrunken heads. Nonetheless, the traditional shrunken head has not been forgotten. Indeed, it was the inspiration for the highly successful Small Blacks collectibles of the 1990s. Today, these false rugby idols are worth thousands of dollars at auction and often sell alongside the heads they were fashioned after.
£1,000 is bid. £1,000. £1,000. Any more? £1,600. Any more? £1,700.
Despite its mixed origins, New Zealand was destined to become a rugby superpower. In the 1940s, we became the first nation to develop the scrum machine.
The scrum machine is very handy as it allows the backs to get on with their work instead of just acting as an opposition scrum.
But the technology soon fell into the wrong hands, and by the 1950s, South Africa, Australia and Iran had developed the capacity to build a scrum machine, threatening the balance of power. Despite it being a predominantly male game, there's now a role for women on the field, albeit a decorative one. To simply call the 91ZM cheerleaders desperate tacky hoes would be, although accurate, highly insulting, though pretty much on the money.
7, 8, stand up, stand by.
Probably the one that annoys most of us is the feminist point of view whereby they think we're just sort of exploiting our bodies.
As Susie Clarkson Nee Aitken points out, it's not all about tits and ass. It's also about legs.
So you agree with cheerleaders? Think they're good?
Well, I like looking at them. I would be deeply embarrassed if it was one of my daughters to see some girl even if she was a brain-dead bugger, and I hope I never have that, a brain-dead daughter. There are other options in life.
Today, Wendy Petrie plays Barbie to Simon Dellow's Ken on One News. But back in the heady 90s, she was one of our leading leotard lovelies. Bendy Wendy has proven that flaunting oneself like a common tart needn't get in the way of a career at TVNZ, nor that one need be a bush pig to be believed. For the real bush pigs, leisure can be a bloody business.
The hunters have their boar, but there's a sacrifice before they reach the weigh-in. In its frenzy, the pig bites off a hunter's thumb.
But however barbaric these activities may seem to the city slicker, the execution and butchery of beasts is by far and away the most satisfying of all after-work activities. And well worth losing a thumb over. But as we'll soon see, leisure also has its dark side. The mind-numbing boredom of living in a tiny country at the bottom of the world has inspired New Zealanders to concoct all kinds of leisure time activities. Whether it be eating light bulbs, or squashing young boys into small automobiles.
Mini cramming is a lot of fun, but not recommended for normal motoring. 22 boys were fitted in, but returned to normal shape in a comparatively short time.
Even tying old ducks to planes enjoyed a brief bout of popularity.
Well, it was quite a pleasure, really. I didn't mind it a bit. I was just looking down on all the houses and people.
You don't feel afraid at any time?
No, I didn't feel a bit afraid.
Do you get tired standing for so long?
No, I wasn't even tired.
String sculpture was popular with proto-feminist women who chose to express their struggle for emancipation in twine. For their part, the young preferred more cerebral experiences through hallucinogenic drugs like LSD. It was the narcotic of choice at drug orgies like this, and its influence even showed up in the advertising of the time.
Thursdays with Hansel's Quench. Happy Thursdays with Quench. Happy Every sip satisfies you. Happy Thursdays with Quench.
In the 60s, a new leisure craze swept New Zealand. It involved uniforms with unusual ties, pretty badges, and latent homosexuality.
Be thou strong, therefore, and show thyself a man.
Scouting was our version of the Hitler Youth, and Kiwi boys were as keen as any to run around in their underwear, jumping over twigs and hanging from cables. When the International Scout Jamboree came to Kaiapoi in 1969, it was as though New Zealand was hosting the Olympics. Hey! Fittingly, our most respected reporter was dispatched to cover the event.
It's very hard to describe the terrific atmosphere here and the intense activity of it all. So, there it is, but if Gary makes it
Edward's dispatches would have made Lord Baden-Powell proud.
The Jamboree has offered the Scouts here not merely an opportunity to meet other Scouts, but also to meet a great many physical challenges. Scouting, we've discovered at this Jamboree, is very much a way of life. The highlight of this, the second official day of the 5th National Scout Jamboree, was appropriately a church service.
10 days of reports ended with a mass multicultural sign-off that is still talked about in television circles today.
You come on, sing Matilda with me. Whoa, sing Matilda, whoa, Matilda. You come on, sing Matilda with me.
We have all enjoyed the Jamboree. I wish to say from the Japanese Scouts, thank you and goodbye. Sayonara!
Little wonder a new generation of youths took to the streets to develop their own unique leisure pursuits. Many felt the country truly began to go down the gurgler when the nation's kiddies discovered this new wet nurse. It was the invasion of the Space Invaders.
Space Invaders. Is it going to take the place of rugby? Watch top half later for a special report.
These electronic entertainment machines are de rigueur nowadays. They're even considered to help coordination and learning.
However, in the late 70s, they were believed to be the root of truancy, theft, and delinquency.
We have found that children that are stealing money are spending them on Space Invaders.
How much money would some of these kids actually steal?
We've had one case recently where a child has spent about $267 on these machines.
Did you wag school to play Spaceys?
Nah, I was too scared to wag school. You know, island parents find out you wag school. Son, it says in the yeah, wouldn't get very far. So I always went to school. You know, ate my lunch, just stayed at school, but straight after, yeah, that was something else. Hang around the spacey parlour, try to pretend I was a Maori. Because all the Maori kids were playing it.
Is that right?
Yeah, well, yeah, they love that game. They love those games. They love the killing games, the Maori people, because they're a warlike people. Yeah, feisty.
But the machines had a terrible effect on our youth, and before long, the poor souls began to dance like robots. In the early 1980s, breakdancing or bopping or heebie-jeebie-knees swept the nation.
For Regan and the others from the Kambula boys of Porirua College, the fascination began with watching TV clips of American breakdancers. They started out by copying. They're now working out their own routines. In some ways, breakdancing's somewhat primitive. The young males strut and preen, while the girls just sit and watch. Porirua, 8 p.m, late shopping night. As the shoppers leave, the breakdancers claim their territory. It's neutral ground for groups from all over Porirua, the Hutt Valley and Wellington. And while there aren't any prizes, there's fierce competition to see who can come up with new moves, routines no one's seen before. And folding up the plastic props of the throwaway days of youth and summer streets, the breakdancers pack away their magic steps until next time.
Although popularised in Porirua, breakdancing was first seen in Kumeu in 1975, when Maria Drakovic busted these moves at a wine and cheese festival. New Zealanders enjoy all manner of leisure time activities.
Surfing. I just surf around the place, that's all.
Having a bit of a laze, getting out in the garden.
For a weekend, I like myself to watch a television program right from the start, 2 o'clock. That's my favorite actually, because I don't smoke, don't drink.
Used to go to the pub.
A bit of skiing in the winter time or water skiing in the summertime.
Having a rest. That's what I look forward to doing. No work.
Oh, sometimes they watch the TV, sometimes they read in the Chinese paper, you know.
Yeah, I think leisure is anything that you enjoy doing and that gives you some sort of fulfillment. It can be absolutely anything.
When I'm on my own, I usually sit on my hand until it goes dead, and then I use it on myself, and it feels like someone else.
What do you do all day?
Now look, do you want me to be honest with you?
Yeah.
You know what I do? I get a bottle of plonk and I come into the park here and I sit here and I drink it. That'll pass me. That'll do me for an hour, excuse me. I'm sorry.
New Zealand today boasts one of the best lifestyles in the OECD. But before pot, PlayStation and pee, there was public concern that increased leisure time would produce a pandemic of problems.
It's been predicted that soon only 2% of the population will be required to work. What are the other 98% going to do? The devil finds mischief for idle hands. Vandalism. The young are showing symptoms of a surfeit of leisure.
Today, current affairs shows like to scare us about terrorism and bird flu. But in 1972, this survey program shocked the nation with its dire predictions of the coming age of leisure. It was hosted by a man called Hugo Manson.
Quote, "Leisure is the great proposition made to mankind and his society, neither of which have any other choice except to use it well or perish." There are many ways to use an excess of energy. This is the way nature made. As a leisure activity, nudism has a growing following who are keen that people should understand the psychological benefits of, as it were, doing one's own thing all the way.
It always rather tickled my fancy to actually go around with other people, similarly unclothed.
Another way of expending leisure time involves the use of a skill.
Well, that's really American prototype too, because the American engines, they give out more or less a wail, woo, woo, and whereas the New Zealand steam makers, they were much more shriller and inclined to give just a shrill blast. Of course, diesels are entirely different, and you get the diesel noise of a groan.
It was the opinion of some scholars that we were heading for a leisure-filled Sodom and Gomorrah. The Romans may have had their gladiators and orgies, but we had something just as extreme. Something called Top Town.
This game is called the Wine Barrel Race. It's played in 2 parts, and in the first heat we have Ashburton and Timaru.
Teams of hot-panted competitors from the provinces swung into action, eager to see their humble hamlets glorified in flashing lights.
Ashburton came second, but they received 3 points.
I remember Top Town very vividly.
Not that I watched it very much. I despised it. I thought it was a particularly vulgar program. I couldn't stand that frenetic physical activity at a competitive level in the provinces. I thought it was absolutely rude and dreadful.
18 for Timaru, 18.
I suppose it was the start of reality television.
We come now to the second last game in the finals of Top Town for 1976, and it's the Greasy Slope game. And up they go as they hit that detergent. Whangarei goes, whoa, oh! Taupo go into the lead. And Whangarei have lost it. Oh, what a magnificent throw. 11 seconds.
It was provincial New Zealand's last punch against what would be its most punishing opponent, urban drift. But for all its sophistication, Top Town lacked an essential ingredient, good old-fashioned animal abuse.
In Whangaihu, they use horse fat to give pigs that elusive quality necessary for the greasy pig competition.
When we say go, you chase the pig. Go! Ho! Ho!
I don't know whether that's a South Town. Go! They're racing. This time and he's home. He's landed in. Ready to go. They're racing. And they're out there in front. Oh, one mile. Horses of east. And he's gone. He's been turned to the ground.
G'day, Swap Marsh in your sunny Bay of Plenty Saturday afternoon. 25 minutes to 4, and in just a few moments, a cricket update from Jeff Smith at the Tauranga Domain.
Summer in Port.
And all that. Whether it be an old biddy playing 500 or a new immigrant driving dangerously in a turbocharged car, New Zealanders are world leaders when it comes to pointless pastimes and reckless recreation in this, our Aotearoa, land of leisure.